Good evening, everybody. I'm Franziska from the Volksbühne, and I would like to welcome you to the Grüner Salon this evening. And we are very happy to host another edition of Real Talk, a series in cooperation with Bad College Berlin. It's like the fourth edition, I think. And I will, without any further ado, give the microphone to Marion from Bad College Berlin, who will introduce you to our today's panel. And also, you can already mark on your calendar, the next Real Talk is, I think, on the 10th of December. And we're very happy that you're all found your way today to Grüner Salon.
Thank you, Deacon. Warm welcome from me as well. This Real Talk series has been invented to represent or to present the discourse of the political diasporas here in Berlin, topics, discussions that are going on in the political diaspora to a mixed public. And we have our fourth event now. It's a cooperation of Bad College Berlin and the Volksbühne, and this time also we have a little help of the DAAD that has given us money to give good drinks and food. And the food is prepared by Aleppo Supper Club. Really delicious, don't miss to try it out in the back. The topic for today is justice for Syria and universal jurisdiction in Germany. The moderation is being taken over by Christin Lüttich again, who's moderating all our real talks here. Thank you so much, Christine. Christine will also take over to introduce you to the panel. And the topic emerged from a class that Carrie Byström taught at Bard College on, tell me again the exact title, on doing justice after atrocity. And Syria was one case study, and it's really one of the very, very few positive developments that one can see nowadays. This legal juridical development with universal jurisdiction now taking place on a national level here in Germany and also in other countries. So I'm very, very excited that we actually have both activists and Syrians who have family experience with this topic here, and personal experience on the panel, and representatives of the German civil society, and also politicians on the panel, which is, I think, a unique thing to have that kind of mix here on the panel. And I'm looking forward to the evening.
Yes, good evening also from my side, and thanks for having me again the fourth time as a moderator. I've been really enjoying leading all the discussions and debates up here, and I'm happy to see also that some people are coming back again and again, so somehow it becomes like a political discussion salon, I think, which is highly needed, and to change also this format a bit of just giving input. So tonight we would also really like to encourage everyone maybe to start with not to take this as the experts telling you what is happening and how it should be done, but really also to seize the chance to think together what is missing, what could be done in addition, and to come up with constructive criticism and constructive ideas. So Marian already introduced me. My name is Christin Lüttich. I have been working and living in Syria from 2007 to 2011 with the German Development Service. And I had to leave 1 month after the uprising started. And I think always to remember that there has been an uprising in 2011, a popular uprising that was not led or initiated by any political party, but really by the people saying that this is enough after 40, 50 years of dictatorship. And that parts of these uprisings are still there because there are still civil society initiatives until today that are totally forgotten in what we always tend to call in the media and in the discussions a civil war in Syria. So I'm very happy that we are able to also shed the light on that again, and to also thank Ameenah and Hesham Hesham also for initiating basically that. So it's again one evidence basically, or one symbol of how much basically Syrians don't stop and simply turn into victims, which is somehow a standard portrait in our discussions. I'm also part of an initiative that is called Adopt a Revolution, which has been set up in 2011. I've put a little bit of information material around. There's also a mailing list that will go around. In case you're interested, you could sign up. And for me, it's a bit of a special moment to be here tonight because, as you have all noticed, for sure, living in Berlin, we are celebrating 30 years of the wall not just falling, but the wall basically being toppled and turned down by people on the 9th of November of 1989. And it's very touching because I'm reading right now this book. It's not very well written, I have to say, but still interesting. It's called Die unheimliche Leichtigkeit der Revolution, like the incredible lightness of revolution. And it talks about a young group of people in Leipzig who basically started to create the first what they called Basisgruppen, like local coordination committees. And for me, it was very touching when I started to read this book because so much of what has happened in Syria in 2011, basically people starting to organize protests, taking care of wounded protesters, setting up media offices, all that has been basically done also in Syria. So it's nothing that is just a unique feature to the GDR movement or other movements in the so-called First World, or in the Global North, as we should rather say. But it's something that people have been with a lot of courage and a lot of sense of initiative been taking in their hands, and it is still happening until today. Because just to have in mind that even the justice, and I think Andreas is going to talk about this a bit more, it wouldn't be possible to make all these legal prosecutions in Germany if it wasn't for human rights activists who have been risking their life to document basically these violations, for lawyers being based here in Syria, and in Syria, to help find witnesses, to collect testimonies, and also basically to give the confidence and the trust in the people that there is something possible. So if we talk about justice today in the universal jurisdiction, what can be done, this was the title. I'm very happy that we have on the panel, first of all, Franziska Brantner, who is a member of the German Bundestag and also a spokesperson for the European policy and parliamentary managing director of the parliamentary group Bündnis 90 Die Grüne. Thank you for being with us. I'm also very happy that we have someone who knows exactly what we're going to talk about tonight, who is Andreas Schüller, director of the International Crimes.
I know that too.
From a legal perspective, I meant to say, from the International Crimes and Accountability Program of the ECCHR, the European Center for Constitution and Human Rights. So thank you, Andreas, for joining us tonight. And then the most two important people tonight also are on the stage with me, Ameenah, Sawwan, and Hesham Moadamani. Okay. Both are activists. So Hesham is a co-manager of Campus Conversations at the Bard College Berlin, a place for students, locals, and refugees to discuss important issues, and also he's the initiator or takes part in what is called the Refugee Voices Tours Berlin. He's going to talk about that a bit more. And Ameenah is not just a student and an activist, but she's also a campaigner with the advocacy group, the Syria campaign, which some of you might know because they also do excellent work on the ground trying to advocate also on behalf of women like these, Fatwa Mahmoud, who are basically the families for freedom, so people who have basically sometimes lost, sometimes still suffer disappearance of their beloved ones, and we still talk in Syria today about 100 to 130,000 people who have been forcibly disappeared. So I think this gives us a bit the relevance already, given the atrocities that have been happening in Syria and are still going on, something that we should not forget when we look at some of the discussions of some German politicians who try to make the tabloids by saying that Syria is safe and people could go back now. So I wanted to start off basically with Hesham and Ameenah, and to ask you a bit, maybe Hesham, like thinking about this question of justice, why did you decide to make the event about that question? What does it mean to you as a person, but also in your discussions with your Syrian friends?
Yeah, sure.
First, thank you very much, Christine, for the introduction, and thank you for everyone for joining this event. And I think in your introduction, many interesting points came, especially in regards to Germany, and how the history can sometimes repeat itself, or how so many similarities. Like just a few days ago, there was a celebration how the wall in Berlin was demolished. And this is a struggle that the Syrians are still facing at the moment. And before I start talking about your answering your question, horrific atrocities took place in this country, and now it's in the past. It came to an end, and the world was shocked to learn about it. And similar atrocities are taking place now at this very moment in Syria. So I thought it's very important to bring one of these stories so we can know why we're doing what we are doing, and also why there is a need for constant action until a change can be made. So as our topic for tonight, it's quite intense, but at the same time we're going to speak about a model of justice and different mechanism for achieving it to those, especially those who were. There is different type or all type of atrocities are happening in this country, but also as we have someone from the ECCHR doing a great job about international justice and prosecution of war crimes that are happening in the country. So I brought a story from the political detainees in Syria. As a prisoner of conscience, those who have done nothing wrong, and I feel it's very important to know a little bit about what these innocent people are having to endure while we are sitting in this cozy room. Maybe all of us know about these atrocities, maybe not. So I will tell one of the many heartbreaking stories. Perhaps this one can remind us of the plight of the Syrian political detainees and the need for action. This is the story of Wissam, one of the few who survived the regime torture. Wissam, before his arrest, used to be an imam. He was detained just like thousands of Syrians, those the regime has been chasing since the beginning of the Syrian revolution that broke out in the summer of in March 2011 for joining the peaceful uprising, or sometimes are detained just arbitrarily. Syrian political detainees are held in prison, military facilities, or other that lack the very proper conditions, living conditions, and are subject to systemic torture, humiliation, sexual abuses that human beings by no means have to be treated that way. One night, the warden threats Wissam of raping his mother and sister if he doesn't seat himself crouching like the rest of the detainees. As the warden leaves the cell, Wissam grew angry and felt in agony. So he started hitting his head against the wall, helpless and can do nothing. The warden returns and he wanted to banish Wissam. He knew that Wissam is a religious man, so he asked his inmate fellow to rape him. The warden enjoys watching the scene, and his devil laugh spreads in the place. The warden woke Wissam, while the latter spent long while crying. In addition to the torture he faced, now he has the anxiety and the problem of facing the society after what was done to him. So as the warden knew his religious status, he used this torture method to duplicate his suffering. Sexual violence has been used against women, children, and men systematically as war strategy since the beginning of the conflict in 2011, and the highest number was recorded in the regime prisons. When detainees are taken by security service members to detention facilities, they start by searching them inhumanely. They touch their bodies inappropriately and then force them to get naked when they insert their fingers in their anuses to search them. Afterwards, a welcoming party of torture is about to start, as well as a long journey of humiliation and torture, which many people did not survive it. Those we learned about their destiny through the Kaiser photographs a forensic military photographer who leaked 55,000 of 11,000 people who were tortured to death. Maybe Ameenah can tell us a little bit more about the Kaysar file and how people started to recognize their beloved ones. Those they never heard about anything about them ever since they disappeared. Yet Syrian families are desperate to learn about the corpse of their beloved ones or the destiny of those never heard from them ever since they were detained and craving for justice to reveal. So this is the kind of atrocities that the Syrians are dealing with, and this is why there's an importance for every kind of initiatives, every way of achieving justice need to be pursued. Persecuting war crimes, universal jurisdiction, campaigning, advocacy. And this is how we started, or this is how I started to take place in the Refugee Voices Tour, which has been happening in Berlin since 2015. And the point of it, which came in your introduction, is drawing parallels between the past and the present, between the two history of Germany, the very eventful history of Germany and the atrocities were committed in this country, and also with what has been happening in Syria since 2011. So we start actually by comparing the GDR uprising in 1953 and what does it mean to live under a sort of an authoritarian regime, and how does it feel also for us to now learn about it from the past and experience it now in the present, and to try to reflect about how much we've learned from the history and how we actually dealing with these kind of atrocity, undermining people's freedom, and so on. And we also compare the prison system that was committing part of the atrocities during the Nazi time, and how another security apparatus like the one in Syria was inspired by it, using similar torture techniques and interrogation methods, especially one of the most famous torture way this year, as we call it, the German chair, that many survivors of torture left to prison in Syria talk about it. And actually the tour itself, it's not mainly about justice, it tries to achieve different things like raising awareness, and especially in regard to the topic of political detainees, it's very difficult to advocate and be active in advocacy for political prisoners internally within a country. So mostly it's related upon diaspora communities, and this is the part that we're trying to take in our diaspora in Germany, in raising awareness and making sure that...
I think we're going to dig into this a bit more, so let's maybe take a step back. I mean, I think it's always hard, and also seeing the reactions in the room, it's always hard to again get aware of all the atrocities you just quoted. One example of out of like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Syrians had experienced that. And you also showed basically to which extent it is not possible to persecute this in Syria today. So Germany somehow is a place of hope that many Syrians might look up at and have very high expectations. So maybe Ameenah, from your perspective, also as someone who had to leave behind home, family, being at the same time being every day confronted by what is happening, because it's also part of your work, part of your activism, so it's not something that is just in the past. Can you tell us a little bit why you chose to discuss this topic again, and what is also like your personal look at that?
Like basically the concept of the Syrian revolution, the Syrian uprising is built on justice, and this is what it was all about for 50 years. Syria has been suffering the injustice, and injustice became over the Syrian revolution to be developed, to be publicly used, to be used on mass kills as mass violations committed towards civilians, where most of the Syrians here in that room were forced displaced. We've been witnessing a lot of atrocities, and it's really hard to address the amount of atrocities. And when you were speaking about the wall, Christine, I was thinking about the Berlin Wall. It was one wall, and I was thinking about the multi-layers of walls that we need to demolish to achieve justice in Syria. We need to demolish all the walls of injustice and violations that committed by the Syrian regime in the warring sites. And I was looking at the road in front of us, and I was like, wow, it's just the beginning. And it happened that the beginning is in Germany, as we are here, 800,000, not going anywhere, and speaking in every single way, advocating, with the support, of course, of German entities, international entities here. We started very small steps.
But maybe because there is so much, like, I mean, one could also think, and I think this is a question we all have, and you also face as someone who works on legal work and also as someone who is in politics, is so many atrocities have happened. So what is the expectations that you would discuss also among Syrians? Because at one point you might feel, okay, so many things have happened, where to start even? So what does it mean for you to start with these cases here in Syria, that, in Germany, that we are going to hear more about?
Of course, it means a lot for me, for all the Syrian families, the families of the Syrian disappeared, the families of the victims who died under torture, the victims of the chemical attacks. Of course, detention and disappearance is the first steps, but there's other cases that have been now under development. It means a lot, but it's at the same time, it's confusing, to be honest, looking at other contexts like Sierra Leone, Yugoslavia, Cambodia, and I was like, okay, it was achievable, but at the end, you look at the end of the road, was it achievable with them? What is the kind of justice what we want? And to be honest, looking at the Syrian context, the justice differ between Syrians who are in Germany and Syrians who are inside Syria. That justice for them means surviving every single day. Justice for them means that their medical facilities not to be bombed again. Justice means that people are not being arbitrarily detained every single day, while justice is like the way that we look at justice now, as we are stable, we came after all to a safe country, what is considered a safe country, and we're looking, okay, we have now more high expectations of justice, not very high because it's actually is being hit with a roof of the ICC and the international mechanism of justice, and how everything is controlled basically by the major power of the United Nations Security Council. But we still want to be in the room. Justice means to us is being there when Anwar, Ruslan, and Diyad Gharib is being trailed, speaking to Fadwa Mahmoud. Like in the last few weeks, she was like, I'm really excited about this. It's gonna be tough for me to be in the room, but I still want to be in the room. Justice for Fadwa also to know the whereabouts of her husband and her son, but also to be in the room and confront these people and witness the justice being held, basically.
Yeah, maybe Andreas, because we have been already touching a little bit, or Ameenah has already touched a little bit about the limits. So the UN Security Council basically is not able to refer any case to the International Criminal Court because Syria is not adherent to the Treaty of Rome. So international jurisdiction is not possible. So maybe you can explain a little bit more what is possible, what is happening in Germany right now, and also what are the challenges.
Yeah, thank you very much also for the invitation to speak here together with you. And yeah, as you said, the number of challenges. So if atrocities are happening as they did and still are in Syria, so the question is, how to, from a legal perspective, how to address them. And if the International Criminal Court is not accessible because Syria is not a member of the Security Council, does not refer the situation to the International Criminal Court. And within Syria, it's also not possible because there is no regime change, there is no transition or anything like that where you would hope for that domestically after 1 or 2 or 3 years of atrocities, something changes that you can have investigations there, that it can all happen there. There is not that much which is open to go to, and I mean, fortunately, there are a number of crimes under international law which are for which you have universal jurisdiction, which means that for crimes such as genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, torture, disappearances, for all of them you have basically international treaties which say these are crimes that are of global concern for everyone, for every state, because they are so heinous and so big. So that's why also every state should have the possibility, but often also even the obligation to investigate and prosecute those crimes. And so that's what universal jurisdiction basically refers to. So if you have torture or crimes against humanity, that also states individually, even if they're not connected to the crimes or to the state, can and sometimes should and must prosecute them.
This is quite a young concept, right? I mean, maybe just also to explain to the audience that this is something that has come up 15, 16 years ago, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's enshrined already in the first treaties after World War II. So if you take the Geneva Conventions, they also say that every grave breach of this convention should be prosecuted in every state which has evidence or access to contribute to those cases to stop grave breaches of Geneva Conventions needs to do so. But so it was in the treaties in '84 in the Torture Convention, then '98 in the Rome Statute for the International Criminal Court, so more and more coming. So the practice is rather new, but it was possible already for more than 70 years. And there we see how long it takes to get here, and that even if you have it in the books and in the law, that doesn't mean that it happens in practice. And for that, I think you need you need to build that. You need successes, good examples where it worked, like the arrest of Augusto Pinochet in London, '98, the former Chilean dictator arrested on the Spanish arrest warrants, which was basically achieved by Chilean victims from the dictatorship who came to Spain, who brought cases there. Spain took up the cases, and Pinochet was in London, got arrested there. So that's a good example, and then states can learn from that. And now you have many Syrians in Germany and other European countries bringing cases here. I mean, what we can do is with our expertise enable the access to justice, make it possible, translate their demands into the legal system here, and then you have cases starting here, leading to arrest warrants, leading to arrests, so then to trials, then hopefully next year. So that's how it's built. But it's,
can you maybe just for us, because most of us are not legal experts, and then we kind of quickly get lost with like legal language. So just like very practically, you have been mentioning two people who were being prosecuted now in Germany. Can you just maybe explain the different steps that led to that?
Yeah, I mean, basically what's happening in Germany, it's a so-called structural investigation by the federal prosecutor, opened already in 2011, and by now there are 4 in regard to Syria, to non-state actors, to state actors, and so on. And in that, evidence has been collected, which means witnesses who came as early as 2011 from Syria to Germany, and were also identified or approached authorities, or also approached us. We started 2012 with the first ones, gave their testimony to the federal criminal police in Germany. And so after months and over the years, the federal criminal police built a huge record also of testimonies on what was and still is happening in Syria. And from that you then cluster cases, so there are a lot of witnesses came from a certain torture center, and then like that you build cases because you have a lot of testimonies on one particular torture center or one particular person. And then you happen to find suspects being in Germany, for example, like the 2 arrested and just 2 or 3 weeks ago indicted, which means it will come to a first trial next year. Based on the evidence given by Syrians, mostly here in Germany, documentary evidence, pictures, the Caesar pictures mentioned, where especially of one of the torture centers relevant in this case, you have all these pictures which corroborates basically the information the witnesses are giving. So that's how you build a case until you have enough to convince the Supreme Court or the Bundesgerichtshof to issue arrest warrants or to allow the indictment, and then it goes to court, and then again you need to hear the witnesses again in a public hearing mostly, and in the end you will have a judgment.
Okay, maybe Franziska on that, because while this is legal work and independent, of course, we all are aware that, for example, human resources that are being put in the federal prosecution is also a political decision. I mean, you can either put one person, you can put 10. This is also a decision that is budget-based, and budgets are made based on priorities. So maybe because you have been working and been very engaged as one of the few politicians, one has to say, unfortunately, in Germany on Syria, you have been very vocal, advocating. What is your observation on the legal procedures? Where do you see also the role of political actors in that? And maybe if you want to add something to what has been said also beforehand.
Yeah, thank you for hosting that event, and good seeing you again. We have put a lot of pressure on increasing the number of people working in that office, from 3 to 6 to 11, so it goes step by step. And of course, every one person can do so much work in looking at the evidence, collecting it, etc. So in the end, the number of cases that will be on a trial in Germany depend to a large extent on the number of people working in that office, to be frank. Because if you really want to do a lot, you can do a lot. There are so many Syrians here, there's so much we could collect. So that has been a constant effort of us to push. We have also been pushing on the UN investigation mechanism. So we always put a dual emphasis on increasing the resources inside Germany, but also increasing the resources to the UN mechanism. I'm like, yes, the International Criminal Court can't do anything, you said it, because they are not part of it, and the United Nations Security Council won't refer it because Russia is blocking it. But the United Nations General Assembly set up this investigation mechanism, which is supposed to collect evidence, which we still believe is also, it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. So we always also said that Germany should pay more for that mechanism, which maybe one day will serve some international court. Who knows, huh? Like it happened in Bosnia and other countries. Sometimes it takes a couple of years, but sometimes it happens. So that was our dual strategy, to increase funding for the UN side and for inside Germany. And of course, when it comes to inside Germany, I think there has been also quite good cooperation with France, one must say, because often you have some witnesses that live in other countries and that you need to cooperate, and then you have cases in France, and that if you have people in court testifying, that can help a case in Germany. So you actually need a lot of cooperation. And I find that Germans have gotten better at that, at cooperating with the French side, for example, on some of these cases where it has been quite useful. There could be more. The UK is also somehow active, others, but basically it's Germany and France these days that are doing something. So we have also been trying to get other EU member states to be more active, for example, via our Swedish friends that are in government, because there are many Syrians in Sweden. So we are, not putting all our eggs on the German side, but trying to push on different avenues, because we know that in the end it's a network of information and evidence that you need to really get the perpetrators really convicted in the end. My worry right now is that a lot of the resources will be drawn into taking care of the ISIS fighters, because we will have to take them back. And it's right so, they're German citizens, or Swedish citizens, or French citizens, and Americans, are no longer going to take care of them, which to a certain extent I can understand, only they are our citizens. But of course, bringing them to Germany has a big risk because usually they're not so nice. And then the question is, how do you get them into jail? Is to have a proper trial. And we also, of course, say you can't just bring somebody into a German prison because he has been in a prison in Syria. Like, that wouldn't stand up for our standards of rule of law. So none of us is saying, forget about a proper trial, just put them back into prison here. So you will need a lot of detailed evidence searching for putting these guys into prison in Germany. So the question is how much of the resources will go into that and will be withdrawn rather from the Assad cases, let's put it that way. So we're again advocating of now saying we have to increase for the ISIS fighters, that we don't take any resources away from the Assad files. Because of course we cannot say that we need resources, we need the ISIS fighters, and they have also committed terrible atrocities. And we also have a lot of evidence on them in Germany. So that will be the other pillar of what will be happening now. And of course, which is more immediate to German citizens' concerns, because those people will be walking around in German streets. And I can tell you there's one party that's going to be very happy about scaring everybody about this. It's going to be the AfD. So all democratic parties sort of have an interest in making this sort of as safe as you can. But that is politically right now, is dominating the debate about what do we do with the ISIS fighters when we take them back home. And I also have to say that the Caesar, the leaked documents, the pictures, helped a lot in Germany getting money for the prosecutor's office. That was sort of the moment when everybody said, okay, look, this is now here, we cannot just pretend it doesn't exist. Yeah.
But
And one thing which I thought was sort of sad on these two that were now in, that one was set free again, because in the asylum procedure process, when he said, I was also part of the system, he was not immediately told that he had the right to refuse to say, etc. And that, so there also we have a lot of training to do for the asylum administration people, because I think there are a lot of mistakes that they still do sometimes, less now, but they have done a lot in the past that don't stand up to the rule of law. So that's also sometimes a pity that we didn't have that in the system from the beginning, and it only started later on, and then it doesn't stand up to some of our rule of law standards, which is really hard to explain to some of the Syrians we meet when they're like, but you could come on, and you're like, I know, but he was not really told what his rights are, and etc., which is in a way so tiny and so bureaucratic it seems.
Yeah.
But for upholding the rule of law, it's very important.
But maybe just to touch upon one point that both of you have mentioned, is at the end of the day, it is important. Okay, so we have universal jurisdiction. There's this possibility, as you explained to us, already rooted in the main treaties that have been that have been put into place after World War II. However, it is important that there is pressure from the community. So it plays also a role in society. There's a relevance also for political actors, basically, to say, okay, we have an interest in that because there is a considerable community concerned by that. So maybe to go a bit deeper, not to stay as general as we did at the beginning, I thought from when I was following social media is that a lot of people, for example, especially on these cases, it was very controversial in the Syrian community. One part was to say, okay, but why do these guys get judged now? They have been defecting later on. And they were defended, and a lot of people from the not a lot, but like there were considerable amount of voices saying like, these guys shouldn't be judged, they shouldn't be tried, they are just like the back end of people that are much more important. So what is the discussions you face also when it comes to legal standards? Maybe Ameenah,
yeah, I think I've heard some sort of the issues that you've mentioned. There's kind of a debate about if, for example, Free Syrian Army people are being taken to justice, instead of the regime people, etc., which is not true, but it's more about people being here, and while the regime, the heads of the intelligence branches are still back in Damascus, and it's more about people who came with their own to Germany, applied for asylum, and they were more accessible to justice. Even ISIS fighters were victims of atrocities of ISIS, were able to see their captures in the streets. That's why the justice happened to people who were here. It's just the logic of the technical law system and how it works. It's not about, there's no preferability.
Yeah, but because I think there is then the legal aspect, but then also there's a sentiment of justice, right? I mean, on an emotional level. So there's a legal aspect, but then there's so how do you, maybe just for us also to understand a bit, why do people feel like, some people said clearly this is unjust. I read that a lot of people said that. Why do you think they felt so? Because it's a question of hierarchy, that the most important perpetrators are not being cannot be reached, or.
To be honest, personally, I did not feel that way, of course, and so it's really hard for me to follow or understand why they were feeling this way. It's just I feel that they were emotionally attached with saying that this person at least did something at the end, or they felt guilty about it, so they got defected after all. Why don't you start with Ali Mamlouk and Jamil Hassan at first? So
main responsibles basically of the Secret Service branches.
But if I may add about dominating the debate that Franziska has mentioned, especially when it comes to ISIS, we really feel the frustration with the debate being dominated while everything's happening in northeastern Syria and with the Turkish invasion and everything, and also the ISIS disappeared, so over 20,000 people who were kidnapped by ISIS and disappeared in northeastern Syria, and without a trace, the dominating debate is the fighters, what will happen to them. And even when in Germany and other European countries there's a conversations about bringing them to trials, it's about what they've done towards their own countries, not more about what they've done the Syrian disappears are not in the minds of the system. They're not a priority. Who cares about these 20,000 Syrians who is kidnapped by ISIS? So it's really frustrating how certain issues have been dominating the debate and dominating the justice priorities for Syrians as well.
Just feel free to step in.
On the ISIS fighters, that's exactly what they're going to be tried for, is that they made people disappear. They're not going to be on trial here for what they've done in Germany, but for what they've done inside Syria. That's what it's going to be their trial about. It's also not so easy to collect the evidence for that. It's the same as for all Syrian perpetrators, whatever side they come from. But the trials on the ISIS fighters comes for what they have done inside Syria. And of course, that's what I said earlier, that you have to connect evidence. And sometimes they will tell you stories about Assad, and vice versa. So, and that's also why do you take those guys? They have the fact that they've come to Germany. I always said, yes, but they might tell good story. They might tell the stories about their higher, in the hierarchy of the guys above them, and that evidence might help us one day to make an international arrest warrant against that guy. If he travels next time to whatever Dubai, we can arrest him, whatever, but that's the hope that you will have. That's the way how you collect evidence, is by people testifying. In Germany we have that rule that if you're ready, it depends on the crimes you've committed, but sometimes if you cooperate with the justice system, it also helps you your individual case, and you will get a lot of information on others. So that's sort of the networking work that the justice sector is trying to do. And we, I will certainly not say let the ISIS fighters come home and don't put them onto trial. I'm like, that would be crazy. They have committed terrible atrocities, as you said. 20,000 disappeared, like so many terrible things. So they also must be put on trial, of course. But I always hope that it will not, and that's what we're advocating for. It doesn't take the resources away for the other cases, and that they do a good crossover of evidence basing.
But maybe to add what you've said, I mean, there is a big difference between regime perpetrators and non-state actors, ISIS and others. I mean, many will be tried under terrorism charges, like membership, and in such a case, the victims and disappeared remain invisible. Would be different if they would be charged with a war crime of disappearance, for example, or crime against humanity, because then victims could also participate in the trial, could be civil parties, Nebenkläger here in Germany, like they will be on the regime case next year. So that's a bit how you deal with ISIS cases, and that's exactly the point. Are the victims not only visible, but do they play an active role in there? Can they exercise also their rights they have as victims in such cases? And I think that's a big question mark how those cases will be dealt with. Is it more the German perspective, these are alleged terrorists and we charge them with terrorism, or is it more they played a role in the conflict and their victims' rights, their victims here?
Maybe just one question on that. Is it possible that they can be tried twice? Once for being member of a terrorist organization, and then again being indicted basically, for example, for disappearing relatives? Because
no,
it's
in
not
the best
same
case,
charge.
it would be, I mean, there could be different charges filed. So one could be terrorism, the other one could be war crime of whatever. But often it simply does not happen, because where it goes also back again to resources and others. I think for a prosecutor it's easier to simply prove membership of a terrorist organization, but not war crimes, because for that you need to do more investigation, you need more evidence. But we think for the purpose of such trials, it's the narratives around that and so on, it's extremely important to add that, because again, if it's only on terrorism charges, because it's the easiest way, it's more the German perspective to have done something from our perspective here, but it wouldn't, I think, justify what happened in the region. But for that you need to do a bit more and then also charge it, because then you would have also different narratives coming out of those trials, which is not there were German alleged terrorists going there and coming back, but it would be then related again to what's all happening in terms of atrocities.
The focus
in the
would be
region.
basically on what happened to the people in the region and not the potential danger to German society.
No, but that's what you need the resources on to do, the collecting the evidence. That's what I said. That's why I'm not against them taking resources for that, because they don't need resources or very few, for alleging them of being a member of a terrorist organization. That's rather easy. The difficult part of collecting evidence is when you want to go on a trial of what they've done inside Syria. But so far we have been in touch, with those guys doing this now. They want to do what's happening inside Syria. It's not that they want to go the easy way. They're very much into, we want to see what happened in Syria. Also, because just being part of a terrorist organization doesn't put you into jail for very long. Put it very bluntly, yeah? And then, you're out rather quickly again.
Now, I was just wondering, because we have been touching about this topic, and there are two things that came up in my mind. One thing is that whenever I talk to German friends who I still have, who don't know so much about Syria, I try to preach to everyone, of course. It is really interesting because, the majority of people tend to say, but yes, every party committed crimes in Syria against humanity and war crimes, which is true in general, but then their feeling is that it's even. So, the amount of atrocities that have been inflicted to victims, the different war parties, state actors, meaning the Syrian regime, international state actors like Russia, but also the international coalition to a much lesser extent, but still bombing people in Raqqa. And then non-state actors like ISIS, for like the majority of friends I have who are not reading a lot of politics, for them they are all even. Whenever I tell them, like, listen, I mean, we just have to look at the statistics, and this is not rocket science, and we see that around 90 to 95% of the civilian victims are attributed to basically bombing, to shelling, to chemical attacks, so basically to cases where we know very clearly through the means of the perpetrator that this could have only been done basically by the state actor or by the international allies. People try to look away. So from that perspective, I just wonder how much could it be also used as a tool to do, again, campaigning to say, okay, this is not just something that we as Syrians who are part of the conflict are inventing, but this is basically also reflected in the decision of the German federal prosecutor in the structural research to say, yeah, these are the majority perpetrators. So I don't know, is it something that you work on or are you facing when you would talk to Germans, when you talk about Syria, when you're doing your campaigning advocacy work, Hesham and Ameenah?
Actually, this is the very main point of the tour that we do every Saturday, that we try to use the stage of Berlin and through this comparison to tell about our experience and our narrative. And yes, by far, 9 years since the beginning of the Syrian revolution, crimes were perpetrated by all sides, but mainly and mostly the regime. And this is also part of my other job with the Syrian archive, also trying to achieve different goals. Like
just
making
Syrian archive.
So the Syrian archive works on curating and preserving visual of human rights violations. I started in 2014, and actually the Syrian conflict, for example, as we try to compare these two atrocities happened in Germany and here, after the Nazis were defeated, people delivered oral testimonies. And yet, in the Syrian conflict, ever since it started with affordance of social media, there is more than 4 million videos recorded by Syrian activists filming the day-to-day war actions. And they say there is more visuals on the Syrian conflict than the age of the conflict itself. So the goal that these videos, we're trying to work them together to achieve different goals, like making memories, and this is also something we can discuss, how these videos and visuals can be used in international justice and persecution. What are the challenges? Because there are so many challenges, like do courts actually look at these videos? And also answering your question, these videos show all the crimes that are done by the Syrian regime and its allies. But our fears and our challenges that now we're hearing there is a narrative by the victorious in Syria as the regime is taking over for now, and unfortunately more videos not come out from the country. So this is how we're trying to preserve these videos. But the process of making this memory and making the narrative of the Syrian conflict, there is many symbolic absences. So, for example, the places that were shown in these videos, they were destroyed and they are no longer there. The people who are in the videos, those who may not show in the videos after recording the videos, or they are in the videos but they are dead. And the most difficult challenge, it's all these videos are filmed by those activists who may not be professional journalists, or they may not have the knowledge to write enough description to their visuals. So the algorithm of the social media, because we don't own these videos and we don't have the right to download them, and we're trying to talk to those platforms to allow us to preserve it for the sake of human rights documentation, but of course they're not listening to us yet. So this algorithm is chasing these videos and taking it down. So we are afraid, for example, in 20 years from now, there will be no videos and there is only the narrative of the regime and just the war and terrorist and Muslim fundamentalist narrative that they trying to promote as their propaganda. So this is one of the challenges, how we can use these visuals in courts and how we can try to preserve.
But this is happening already. I mean, it happened on Mali, I think, and then the International Criminal Court acknowledged basically footage that was, I mean, stupidly enough, to be very honest, filmed by the perpetrator himself as a means of propaganda when he was destroying World Heritage.
Also,
yeah.
I can.
Also in Germany, there were a number of people were convicted because they posed with dead bodies and put the pictures on Facebook, and that's a war crime. You pose with dead bodies, and so those trials also happened here. But so the evidence is used. I mean, of course, the sheer amount which is out there. Of course, you will only have bits and pieces in court trials, really to the case. But I think the important part with it is when we now talk about the trial coming up next year. It's about torture, and there you often, or most of the time, you don't have the videos, not even of the torture prisons inside. So that's why the Caesar pictures are so important, because they come from inside the systems, and that often does not happen. But of course, one of the charges I think, is that also against the person who brought protesters to the detention facility, and that's aiding and abetting a war crime. So on this, there might be videos. So if you really go into the details of a case, and you can see and find where the evidence is, and then it comes back to all forms of videos, pictures, and all of that.
I just want to add that sometimes also now in the migration process, the asylum application, they read out the cell phones, and it's quite surprising to what extent how many actually have videos on that. And then it becomes difficult with the rule
like
of
videos
law.
that were shot by the people themselves?
Yes.
Okay.
And that they have not, they don't think about it when they come here, that they still have this on their cell phone, and that if they're going to apply for asylum, now they check the cell phone, and that they find what they have committed. And then it starts complicated with the rule of law, because you don't have to hand in yourself. So it's very tricky legally on how these videos can be used or not, to what extent. So it's highly complicated legally, but they tell us it's quite surprising that people don't delete them before they come.
About the narrative, I just wanted to say that major efforts have been done by Syrians over the years. At the beginning, reporting and documenting what's happening, it was more about urgency and telling the world what's going on. But after years, we started to understand this is our narrative. The narrative that owning it is another way of justice. And in many areas in Syria, when there was reconciliation, one of the conditions of the reconciliation was, from the Syrian regime side, was deleting all the materials documenting the body violations in the area online. In many towns and areas, I know that it happened. I contacted the Syrian archive, and in many cases they were able to contact YouTube and restore the information, not online, but to download it and keep it for our narrative, for our trials, for the justice that we are aiming at it. And you said also about...
just explain for people who are not so much into Syrian specific topics what these reconciliation agreements are about, so people can understand the term?
There was areas in many Syrian cities, in Damascus suburbs, in Homs, in Aleppo. There were areas which were under siege, complete blockade by the Syrian regime. People have suffered starvation, bombing, and the short out of all goods. And it was more about kneel or get defeated or killed. And after years of being besieged, all of these areas were forced to do reconciliation, which had many conditions, which they were not they did not come to the light after all. For example, I come from an area in western Damascus that was besieged and then was part of the reconciliation. And one of the conditions that was listed, it was freeing all detainees, and also, of course, deleting all the documentation. All the documentation was deleted, but not even a single detainee was released, and even more people were arrested since then. It happened like 3 years ago. So this is what is reconciliation.
And it's just important, I'm sorry that I'm jumping in, it's just important because it's one of the means that basically Russia is trying on an international stage to use to say that, okay, people are giving amnesty, they are being welcomed back in what the Syrian regime likes to call Hadan al-Watan, so like the Schoß der Nation, I don't know how to, the lap of the nation, I don't know if you would say this in English, it sounds very weird. But basically these people disappear. So what, for example, I mean, it's been almost a year and a half now that we had the attack on Ghouta, one of the biggest areas that was rebel controlled. 400,000 people were living there. It has been bombed into oblivion by Russia and the Syrian regime. Until now, no one from the international community, meaning ICRC, International Red Cross, UNHCR, are able to enter. There have been unconfirmed reports about thousands of young men and boys basically being detained in concentration camps. And we don't know, it's not accessible. And this is basically what is called reconciliation afterwards. It's being forced to give up, and those people who decided to leave were transported forcibly to the north of Syria. And this is just important to understand that this is something that will be used in negotiations and is being used by Russian and other actors to say basically, but we have now guaranteed that these people, although they were on the other side, they can be now normal Syrian citizens again.
And adding to what you've kindly mentioned, there's a lot of pressure on the refugee return, connected very much to the reconciliation. I was like, okay, it's peace now, it's comfortable, electricity is back in some parts of these areas, people can come back, it's safe, etc. And due to the situation in neighboring countries, especially Lebanon and Jordan, there's a kind of organized return by the Syrian regime where they're sending a person, kind of a representative, taking names down and then get back to Damascus, gain confirmation, and then buses to bring these people back to Damascus. And it's happened in several areas, while the UNHCR are calling this as a voluntary return.
Yeah, I think there was a case of 6 people who were sent back from Lebanon, and they were arrested the moment that they were back. And also now with the implications or with the messages that could be used after the defeat of ISIS, and yet it's the same conditions that made ISIS emerge. It's still out there, which is the dictatorship in first place that created all this chaos. And same with the return of Syrians, because this is a debate that has been going on lately in Germany about is Syria sicher, and is it safe that we can send people, and also the same conditions that made all this mess are still out there. So our problem with the Syria regime that still
and then maybe this
exists.
Maybe this is a very good transition to a very short second part, because we're a bit over time. I'm sorry. I hope you're not being bored too much, but it's a very complicated issue, and I think it's important to really show all the aspects. There are 2 aspects I think it's important to highlight still. One aspect that you just touched upon is basically there was an ECCHR event some weeks ago, and there was a lady from Tartus. So Tartus is a city that has never been under opposition control. It's majority Alawite, which is the sect that Bashar al-Assad is from. Though it is the province also that has been paying the highest tribute in terms of young soldiers, young men being forced to be basically Kanonfutter, being basically fed to cannons in the conflict. And this lady said, I'm now in Germany. If I testify here in Germany as a witness, and tomorrow German politics change and I will not be granted subsidiarity protection anymore, will I have to go back to Tartus? And so maybe the question is for me a little bit, and I found it very important, is to say to which way can we give insurance also to Syrians being here. Most of them are still in a kind of limbo legal situation. If not them, then many of them were not able to do a family reunification, so many of them were not able to go back. Family members are still there. So what from a legal, but maybe also from a political perspective, could be done to ensure these people, or is it simply something we cannot ensure? First question. And the second question, which goes a bit back to the other debate, is so torture is something that you have been focusing on in the trials, as we understand it. It is a massive, it has been a record before of the Syrian regime, a champion of torture, although it signed, by the way, the Convention Against Torture. But why is it not possible, and maybe we can talk about it a little bit, to legally persecute, for example, chemical attacks that were very well documented, the bombing and the shelling, where we have even initiatives like Bellingcat, international investigation bodies that even like trace records, and there was this very big feature by the New York Times, I think recently, where they even traced discussions, communication between Russian pilots, for example. So why is it not possible to focus on these cases where so many people, in terms of victims, have died?
I guess most questions go to me, partly, at least. Yeah, I mean, protection, of course, that's super important. And I mean, also for witnesses who testify here, whereas a family maybe is still in Syria and things like that. That's a huge issue. I mean, of course, there are a number of ways to grant those witnesses certain forms of protection. I mean, it's up to the judges, of course, to decide on it, and up to us as lawyers and others to say why it's important, why you have an individual threat here and the need for certain protective measures. So that's one part. Also others who testify. I mean, if you testify here in public in a trial, I think you can then individually also argue a stronger case for yourself why you would be threatened going back. You know, so again, there are ways to do that. Of course, we can never give, I think, someone a 100% guarantee because there are too many actors in there. But if you have a certain trust in the system and a good supportive system, I think there's a bit. I think you can calculate the risks with what you can also achieve with having such a trial going forward. But it's always in a criminal trial like that transnationally. An issue and where you really have to see how to balance it, and no question about that. Yeah, and talking about other cases and crimes. I mean, what we see now, it's the first beginning also in the upcoming trial. There is also charges of rape and sexual violence, which we welcome. That this has been taken up and it's indicted. It's not only about torture but also of those crimes, so that they are also visible. Yeah, chemical weapons and shelling of urban city centers and stuff like that. I mean, I think that, but I don't know, I think that's also in part of the structural investigation. So basically, investigations are going on. But the question is, you know, do you find a perpetrator here and only with an arrest you would make it potentially public? Or are you going for arrest warrants against, what we also try to do, to have arrest warrants against high-level responsibles, those for the system of crimes, not who happen to be here, it's more opportunistic. So there might also be investigations going into that direction, and there's also not the obligation to make each and every arrest warrant public. So basically there's a gray zone where we simply don't know what's happening.
Also, okay.
But of course, from the other side, victims, survivors, NGOs can also of course set the scene with filing complaints on certain cases, setting certain narratives, making arguments why this and not that one, or why this one too should be investigated basically. And that's something we are in contact with the UN mechanism. They are investigating so that they maybe look more into other cases which are not done by the German or Swedish or French prosecutors. but also with all the war crimes units in Europe, they have biannual meetings of all these units where we also having events and talk to them. That's all discussed, and so it's not that prominent at the moment, but my hope is that also in that direction investigations are already going on, because they of course they also see what's out there. But it's true, and on some of this there could be more push also from a civil society side to bring those crimes in or charges into the focus.
Maybe for your first question, what happens to the person that is going to testify? It's rather the other way around. It should be an incentive that that person probably has a higher claim for an individual case for asylum than not just being protected on subsidiarity grounds. I'm like, if you're testifying in court, you can have a much better case for staying here when the case for subsidiarity will maybe one day disappear. So I would always tell those people, and it's not 100% insurance, of course not, but I think in our legal system that will still, because the judges are all knowing the importance of evidence, so they will not, I don't know what would have had to happen to Germany for judges to no longer protect witnesses. So I would rather put it the other way, that it should be an incentive for everybody to go in court and testify, because it will change their status more easily from being on subsidiarity claims to individual right to asylum claims. So that's the first thing. And on the second one, yes, it's underway, some is not public, and also you really want to be sure to have a good case before you make it public. So on the New York Times article that you cited, we rather go for sanctions. We know those guys, so of course one day we hope they're going to be judged, but in the meantime we say they need individual sanctions, and that's actually could be much more effective because it might be deterrent now. So sometimes you also have to watch what is now the right thing to ask for. There we still say those Russian guys have to be sanctioned, their kids shouldn't be able to study in Munich, and their wives not be able to shop in Paris. So that, in that sense, for us, it's right now the priority would be more effective in our view. But it's, one day hopefully they will be tried.
Okay. And this is maybe also the perfect transition to the last question that we would
but Russians to be on trial one day is going to be hard.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why for those guys we go for sanctions.
And maybe, you already touched upon that, so sanctions, individual sanctions, so this is very important, I think, so sanctions that target specific individuals that have committed crimes, so it's not about general sanctions on Russia, which would be very hard. So this is one means that is basically out, in addition to the dependent jurisdiction that we have been talking about, but also we have been touching so much about on the importance of civil society work, pushing for certain subjects. And I was just wondering, I know that a Syria campaign also, you are working a lot on the file of the 20,000 people or let's say the remaining family members of the 20,000 people that have been disappeared by ISIS. So is there so Families for Freedom is, for example, a good example where we saw that people have disappeared mostly from the regime have been set up to organize themselves in a kind of initiatives to put pressure. They were going to Geneva, they are talking internationally. Is there any plan on that by Syria campaign or by the individuals to, for example, set up a victims group for people related to suffering from ISIS, and also to push to basically, as Andreas explained, not just to have them judged or to have them tried for the reasons of terrorism, but for the disappearance and extrajudicial killings?
Thank you, Christine, for bringing this up. Of course, the Families for Freedom and the Caesar Families Association, they drew great examples of resilience and leadership of families and families of victims. And answering your question, yes, there is a group that has started in the last 3 months. Earlier this year, we've been trying to push and we started our research about the disappeared by ISIS in northeastern Syria. And we've been able to connect with so many families, activists, and we try to understand the area, how the complexity of the area, and this is of course before the latest Turkish invasion. And we've been in touch with a group of families. The group actually has started, and they're registered now in France. It's called the Coalition of the Families of the Kidnapped by ISIS, and they're now. Half of the group is based in Germany, some group members are based in France, and there's also several members of the group that are based in Turkey, and we're working through with the group step by step on building their vision and mission and media profile. So hopefully in the next very few months we'll be seeing the family members taking more bold role when it comes to media, and also talking to decision maker and advocating for their cause.
Okay. Wow, okay, so I mean, as we understood, there's a long road to go and it takes a lot of patience, and I think Germany knows this very well. I mean, we're still having trials on Nazi figures, camp guardians, and so on. So maybe it's a time, because we have been sitting here on the podium and torturing you with our monologue. So I hope you have questions, comments. We had this idea of doing a fishbowl, but we don't have an extra chair. And there's no. We can bring up a chair, maybe.
I'm a senior student at Brantner. I find it rather interesting that when we talk about justice in Syria, we mainly focus on refugees in Europe. And I tend to call it more like a pragmatic justice when it comes to political parties in whole Europe and in Germany. So the idea is, as someone who was detained by the Syrian government, of course it's rather traumatizing for me and for all other Syrians to see someone who committed these kind of war crimes, who detained, who murdered, etc. But it's even more traumatizing to see that there is still majority of ISIS fighters who are foreigners are still in Syria, and no one basically is talking about it. Would you call it remote justice, whatever you can call it? Ameenah touched base on the idea that, so many 20,000 people have been detained by ISIS and are now disappeared, but also there is still, as you all know, majority of ISIS fighters are not even Syrians. They're actually coming from the places that we're sitting in right now, from the US, from the Arab world, rather than from Syria, and they're still there. And yes, one ISIS fighter can come to Europe and can, of course, kill people. Like one ISIS fighter can actually start a very big crisis. But they're there. They're sitting there in Syria. In my province, there are thousands of ISIS fighters and ISIS families, and no one is talking about it. So, yes, Turkey today announced that they're going to send back some of the ISIS fighters who were detained in Turkey. But what about Syria? ISIS can be ISIS version 2 in Syria, and then we're gonna again keep sending weapons and selling weapons to the Syrian government and whatever.
Okay.
But take them or talk about it.
So Karam, basically, I mean, if I want to get a question out of that, thanks a lot for the comment. I think
I can ask you a question.
Huh?
What about ISIS fighters who are still inside Syria?
Yeah, exactly. So on that, maybe it would be interesting from a legal perspective, because I know when we met with members of the Foreign Ministry, they have always been advocating, always saying that we are not able to take these people back because we cannot negotiate with the Kurdish Autonomous Administration because they are not on a völkerrechtliche basis by international law. They're not a legal entity. So as a legal expert, can you maybe explain us if this is just an apology or if it's really something that is legally not being able to be done so we can get these people out of Syria? At least for the Germans, let's talk about the German ISIS fighters who are in Syria.
Well, I think that's, I mean, if German diplomacy wants to talk to also non-state actors or non-recognized governments, I'm sure they'll find a way to do that. So it's a pretty cheap excuse to say they are not recognized, so we don't have any consulate there, and there's no point of contact. Other states are able to do that. Germany is also able to do that on other topics or in other countries and regions. So I think that's rather trying to avoid and distance themselves from getting into that. But I mean, to your question, it's of course it's extremely difficult and it should be a topic. What to do with ISIS fighters still in the region from various different countries, and how to, I mean, what to do with them and how to avoid that they regroup and get stronger again and so on. And I think, I mean, justice and universal jurisdiction, that's one part, but of course there are many other parts in terms of the politics in the regions, whole debate now with Turkey coming in, with the US withdrawing, and I think this goes much more into the problems in the realities on the ground, and where with the judicial system, you can try to build cases and see how to get people extradited so that they can stand trial and so on. But I think the current issues are much more on who has control and what's happening on the ground before you can again talk about justice. But of course you should be prepared once there are ways are opened that justice can happen, and whether it will be in Germany or elsewhere.
I don't think that we have not been talking about it in Germany. We have been talking certainly a lot about it. But the German government, I think, has been very reluctant in taking them back, and it has been convenient that the Americans de facto protected them together with the Kurds. And Trump, it's terrible to say that he said almost a year ago, take them back, otherwise one day I will let them free. And nobody took it serious in Germany. Everybody said, the Americans won't do it. But Trump did it. He was like, if I leave them, they come to Europe. If you're not ready to take them back home, you might want to send your own soldiers here, protect them. I take my boys back home. And that's very new for Europeans to realize that, oh dear, in the end, the Americans won't save our ass. And that's a very new experience for Germans. So I think that is, one has to take into account that we were used to having, for the last 70 years, in the end, Americans taking care in the worst case. And that's gone. And that's very new to German debate. It's new to a French debate. And that's why now there are very intense discussions on how do we take them back, how does it work. I also believe that this that was an excuse for long, but now they actually don't talk about it anymore. I haven't heard this for a couple of weeks now. That was the excuse over the last half a year when we still believed Americans would still take care of them. That was the excuse. I haven't heard it in town. At least not a couple of weeks. No, seriously, I haven't heard it again. Now the question is, how do we collect enough material so that we can put them for long enough into jail? That's the discussion we're having. And that's, we're trying, as we have been debating, to push that they don't judge them just on being part of a terrorist organization, but what happened or what they've committed in Syria. And then there's this entire difficult other question about the families. You also mentioned the families. That's so much more complicated. What do you do with the children? How, what will we do with them in Germany?
But there has been a court decision 2-3 days ago, right?
Yes, they will come back. But the question is what do you do with them? Do you leave them with their mothers when their mothers come? That is it's not necessarily only it's also a legal question, because, when can you take a child out of a family? In Germany, it's very difficult. So this is a very complicated issue, the family side. And I don't know really anybody who has the perfect answer yet. At least, I don't know, I'm open. We're searching on what is best for the child, to come into adoption family or to stay with the mother, to go into joint family. There's not so much evidence on what might be better for the child. It might be just worse to have another traumatization of being separated from their families. I don't know. It's very difficult.
But I I guess that in that sense you're right that all the discussions we have are rather focused. I mean, it's a very Eurocentric perspective where we ask, what do we do? What is going to happen to German society if these people who are being portrayed as monsters, at the end they're human beings, are coming back? And yes, there's very little knowledge, and I think this is. I would also highly encourage you people who are working on that to be more in public and to talk about that more, because I think, yes, there is a lack of awareness that so many Syrians, I mean, there is this narrative that a lot of Syrians are part of that movement, right? I mean, if you would ask the average German, he would say they're all Islamists, and Islamists for them is jihadists as being ISIS. So I think, yes, there's a lot of work to be done. So, thank you, Karam. Who wants to join? If you don't feel comfortable at all, you can also ask a question. I don't want to force anyone. We are in a free country. Ein offenes Land für freie Menschen. So you're not forced. It's just, I think it's nicer to have a new format. Okay, Marion.
In the history of the GDR and of West Germany, after the building of the wall in 1961, it wasn't the West German government, but the government of Hessen, I think it was, established a documentary center in Salzgitter to collect all the materials, ongoing materials of crimes at the wall for future trials. Would that maybe be a historical example that we could connect to and bring forward to say that the state should actually have a responsibility to, in a centralized way, collect what's happening now for future times? Or is that happening already in this dimension?
Yeah, it depends for which purpose. If it's for trials, then it's happening already with the federal prosecutor who's doing this structural investigation, basically taking testimonies on everything they can get, more or less. And I mean, that also goes to the point you said before, whether there's enough to prosecute also ISIS fighter here. I mean, there are structural investigations into ISIS since 2014 in relation to the Yazidi, and the second one even also for some years. So and if the federal criminal police investigates ISIS for 5 years already with all the people coming here, they don't start from zero, to say the least. So I think it's also important to know in this debate. I think those archives would have if they have other purposes, which I think many should have also at one point, to so that scientists, researchers can go into archives and historians at some point. Then of course the federal criminal police or prosecutor is not the right place, because the way they ask and they store information, of course it's not where any historian can just go and read through the documents at any point in time, because those crimes never prescribe, so they can also be prosecuted in 70 years, so they will not be opened for this purpose. So that's another idea, I think, to further, and same with the UN mechanism, by the way, it's also for trials, but of course I think there should be archives for this purpose, and I think there's already quite some work going on by Syrian groups. But the question is, I think in the end, how to connect it, where to pool it, how to collect the information.
And how to fund it and get
how to fund it, absolutely. Yeah.
Wie sagt man denn verjähren?
Prescription or statute of
Yeah, because there's no limitation on those crimes.
No.
So if your purpose is to make it public one day, then as you said, it's not the right way. Because as you just mentioned, we still have some trials of some Nazi commanders or whatever, even though it's been long ago. So
yeah, some information is stored for 120 years.
Yes,
it's blocked,
exactly.
and after that they could release it,
Yeah.
because after 120 years the perpetrators are not living anymore.
yeah, exactly. So, but it's a quite a long time, 100.
Or
That's
90
also,
years.
by the way, Hessen. We're having this debate on the NSU, which is also 120 years or whatever. It's always 120 years, which makes it politically almost impossible to do anything with it. So I think there you really have to make sure that you know what you want to get out of it. Do you want to get the trials out of it, or do you want to have a public political debate? Aufarbeitung, you know. So probably you want to have both, but you know, it's two pathways, and it's very interesting, I think, with that question in mind, what do you want to use it for, that there has been quite a bit of frustration over the Yugoslavia trials, with people really being disappointed on how, in the end, the case is set and what is left out or what's not used, when they have the impression the story has not been told. And the judges just tell them, but that's, you know, sort of the story we have here. So in that sense, knowing that region and how some are very frustrated about the processes and how it has been led and has been misused or, you know, sort of turned into and twisted, that you have to be very clear what you want to get out of it, and if you believe that's not what we want, then you have to take other ways. Because that's, I think, some people now, when I talk to them on the Balkans, say that if we'd only known that before. And I'm like, yeah, shoot, we shouldn't repeat the same mistakes now with other countries.
But I think the challenge, maybe, I mean, I went to Bosnia also last year, and it was very heartbreaking to go also with like my partner who's Syrian to Srebrenica and to talk to the local guide who basically lost his father and lost his brother, and they had just 25 years later found the bones of his brother, but they couldn't dig it out because it's still mined. The mines are still there, but there's no money anymore because the international community doesn't want to continue anymore the work, so they cannot demine the area just to take out the bones. He's not sure, but like he found a witness that basically went back to Srebrenica. But I think what is the big difference, and this is also what whenever we touch about this question of archive and memory with Syria, is it's going on, the conflict, and this is something that I think, while we're talking about trials and justice, I think one thing that we have to be very careful about is that there's a lot of people from also different political parties, not just the AfD, also members of the CDU, conservatives, they want to portray the idea that it's over in Syria, that majority of the regions are under control of the regime, that it's secure, that there are reconciliation deals, that there are amnesties being issued. And one of the things that we find always difficult in terms of strategy is not how to start this work on archiving and memory. We're not giving the impression that, okay, it's done, you know, it's over. And this is also a debate that I find quite important in the Syrian community. I don't know, Ameenah, you wanted to add also something, whether it's related to that?
Yeah, thank you, Christine, for bringing this. Thank you for bringing this up. Yeah, it's certainly not over, and I just had one question to Andreas, following up on Marian's question. Actually, it's more about the international impartial independent mechanism and how the ECCHR work in around Europe is connected to the IIIM. Can you please elaborate more about this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we started to work already in 2012 on those cases, especially because we said you need to start somewhere. And at the time it was on a small scale, but you need to start somewhere. And the last years we filed cases in Germany, particularly of course in Austria and Sweden. Tomorrow we have a big event in Norway, in Oslo. We also active with other groups in Switzerland, France, Belgium, Netherlands, so everywhere where kind of war crimes units are active. So to engage those states, to push them to do more, to coordinate and collaborate. And then you have the UN level with this IIIM mechanism that also collects evidence. And we think that all of that...
Yeah, IIIM is just for the impartial, international impartial investigative mechanism that is being set up by the UN. Yeah, and that's so it's 3 mal I, 3 times I, IIIM.
Exactly, so that's the UN investigation body, if you like, what here a prosecutor would do with the federal police. And I mean, we think all of that, what the UN mechanism is doing, what Germany and others are doing, I mean, that's collecting evidence, and as we've just said, these crimes are not statute barred, so which means in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years you could put people on trial, but you can only do that if you now collect the evidence, if you now build the case, and not if you start in 50 years. So so that's why it's so important that so many actors do something now, even if it's often not really visible, even if there are only few trials. But we know it's there, and whenever there's an opportunity or things change, there's a justice option, and hopefully at one point also in Syria, because that's where the place where the trials should take place at one point, and even if it takes its time. But to be able to do that, you need to build that, and I think on Syria we are a good way that this is happening. But of course we also wouldn't recommend to wait for 30 or 40 years to bring a case here or there, so you need parallel processes reacting to an ongoing conflict, but also on narratives to write this history already. And that doesn't necessarily clash with justice and trials. In the best way, it even goes together, so if we have a trial next year in Germany, there will be a lot of evidence in open court, there will be a public judgment. That's all material you can use for these purposes, so that, and that's also what we hope for, that the trial next year can be used from very different disciplines, perspective, sides, way beyond what's actually happening in the courtroom with these two accused.
I agree. That's why I earlier mentioned, on the Russian flight pilots, for us the current strategy is to say they must be individually sanctioned. I hope they will be one day in court, but the conflict is still going on. They're still bombing in Idlib, so I want to stop them now, and that's why my priority is to have individual sanctions. That's why I completely see it. Like, it's not an ended conflict. We're not just talking about justice one day, but stopping it now. And there are sometimes the strategies, and the priority, I want to say, is maybe a different one. Of course, it might be used one day in a court, but where do I put my priority is sanctions. And as you said, it's been very frustrating that we have been discussing so much about the Kurdish region, which is also not just Kurdish, there are many others also living, but that we have not talked enough about Idlib and what's happening there right now. It's not been a topic for tonight, but I've been wherever anybody said something, I said, and don't forget Idlib, and don't forget Idlib, and don't forget Idlib. Sometimes you feel like you're sort of repeating yourself all the time. You can't even hear it anymore. But on the other side, it's so under the carpet. And yes, that's the difficulty of, on the one side, wanting to stop what's happening, collecting the evidence. And then on the other side, being part of already telling the story of what's happening, because I still believe, that the story they're trying to tell the Assad guys is, this country has been pacified, now we need the European money to reconstruct. And if you give us the money to reconstruct, we also take away refugees. Wouldn't that be nice, so to speak? So in that sense, I think, telling those stories about what has been committed and what's still going on and what isn't, that we don't have access to Muta. And you mentioned that we have been asking, for example, several times now, so what's going on and nobody can tell us. That's also already now being part of the counter-narrative. So to a certain extent, you can't just say, here it starts and there it ends. But in terms of civil society, you have to be clear where you put your priorities sometimes. I think that's not always so easy. We have internal big debates on, what should we put the focus on now? Because usually attention span is quite small.
Yeah. Is there a last? I would give the space free again, and then maybe we would take 1-2 more people. So Samer, and someone over there is also pointing. Just come close to the stage and then you can be the next person. And then maybe because it's very hot, I don't know if it's as hot down there as it's hot up here. Maybe it's just the lights. But I feel a bit of tiredness also, so as we are still gonna be around, I would maybe say 2-3 more people, including you 2 guys, and then we would maybe close the official part and then we can still have bilateral exchange.
So thank you everyone for being here. So I have a question concerning this meeting for Constitutional Committee in Geneva. So I saw report from the Swiss radio that one member of the Syrian delegation who is basically representing the Assad's regime is actually former member of the Syrian secret police, and there were reports that he was directly indeed involved in torturing Syrian prisoners. So one former victim of his, he came forward, he said he was pulled by his hair from this person and he was beaten by him until he lost consciousness. So I also saw that the state's prosecutor in Switzerland said he's aware of this person, but unfortunately he has UN diplomatic immunity. So here I have actually two questions, from legal point of view. Are these kind of persons really untouchable as long as they are negotiating on behalf of this regime? And from political point of view, is this how we would for us as Syrians, as normal Syrians, do we really need to expect that as long as we want so-called political solution, we need just to forget about these kind of atrocities and we need to accept these kind of actually war criminals negotiating on our behalf to be able to have a constitution for the future? And thank you.
Yeah, really good question and also difficult one. Because if you're part of an official delegation, you have this immunity to travel and to be able to attend those events. But of course, what's important here, and we see it in many cases, especially in Geneva, in Switzerland, where also from other countries there are delegates to the UN, which are also involved in torture and so on. But it's the Swiss never allow any case against them because of the immunity when they come to visit those international meetings. But I think the important thing is to make this public, to show who's coming there, who's part of the delegation, and especially also to say that these are not the people who should negotiate the future of Syria or the constitution. So bring it back from the legal difficulties where it's blocked, except the person then continues to travel to France for some private visits or shopping or something, then you could get such a person, but as long as part of the delegation in Switzerland, not. But make it a political issue, say who's in the delegation, who's supposed to talk about the future of Syria, and who should be actually talking about the future of Syria. So bring it to that level, and then it will also hopefully change something.
There was also the question on the political.
So yes, for us.
You can just take maybe the mic off.
So for us as Syrians, is this really what we would expect in the future, that we so-called war criminals would need to negotiate to reach political solution?
If I can also add to your last point, it's just that as Syrians, and especially in the journey of seeking to serve justice, the place that where we are trapped now. For example, we talk for a quiet bit about a sort of a retributive justice happening in Germany, and two people were brought before court, and Jamil Hassan was issued an arrest warrant, but of course he maybe can come with a delegation, so no one can touch him, he won't come for shopping. So do the Syrian actually feel justice doing this? I don't think that can, in the general sense, but of course this is an important work that we should keep pursuing, but every other kind of work. But again, to the difficult place where we trap that, my opinion that we're Syrian, we're of course gonna try to do no matter what until this regime can be overthrown or these atrocities come to an end. But at the same time, we are also open to, on beside the repetitive mechanism of justice, to also make other kind of work. And also my opinion is, as you mentioned about, don't forget Aleppo, but also to not forget the people who remain detained until the moment and are suffering. So because our aim not revenge, but actually to bring remedy to this society, trying to pursue any other mechanism, but of course not what you said.
But because he asked a question and then...
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm adding just
yeah,
more comments
just
about,
is
how
it related,
Syrians
or should Franziska
are feeling.
No, but should Franziska ask it and then you...
I just need to add more 2 words.
But I can do it
Yes.
again.
It's just, what you said about other parties promoting for that Syria is safe now and we can send people. This is maybe the only one option that the Syrian wouldn't go to after all what they sacrificed, but also when taking in account the imbalance of power, also to think also, or to do other things that, for example, this is also, you can help us, in addition to political discussion, ad hoc tribunals, all the possible options, and also if you can help us think about other kind of things that can help, the living one.
So other legal actions. Okay.
I should say that looking at Syria and the situation in Syria and the possibility of justice and accountability, and I really understand your frustration. We are through this phase together, or phases, because it's ups and downs, I would say. When something happens, we're like, oh, this is good. But then my inner thoughts come out, and after 8 years of the Syrian uprising, after 8 years of the first child who were murdered under torture, we got the first arrest warrants. It's good news, but it's a bad news at the same time, because it took us 8 years to achieve this level. But looking at other contexts, looking at Yugoslavia, looking at Cambodia, Sierra Leone, and other Rwanda, it's sad to say that we're not the only ones that are going through this. When I feel frustration, I think about them, and I think about the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, and I think about them going there every weekend for 30 years demanding their beloved ones. I think about the mothers of the Saturday mothers in Turkey, and about their 20 years of struggle. And then I think if they were able to achieve something, at least a little thing, and tell themselves that we've been able to do something for our beloved ones, then we could.
You had this question on how is it possible that they're sitting at a negotiating table
in Geneva.
In Geneva, because it's the fact is that if you cannot topple the regime and you're in the military weaker position, at one point you start negotiating. And it was always clear that if you start negotiating with the Assad regime, you have criminals sitting on the other side. Whoever sits there is a criminal. There's not one sitting there who's a nice guy. Sorry to say that bluntly, but as soon as you are in that logic, on the other side, you don't, you have the regime that has committed all those crimes that we spoke about tonight. And then you can, of course, say, why did we end up in the situation? And you go back to, why did we never have a no-fly zone? Christin and myself, we have been, I don't know how many protests we staged for that, but, plenty. But we didn't get there. So, those options have gone. And then the question is, what do you get out of this now? We have been skeptical about that constitutional process now, but on the other side, it's one light maybe that you will get somewhere. I don't know. I think the EU's biggest sort of leverage comes when it comes to the reconstruction money, because that's what Russia sort of wants. They don't want to finance all of this. And we always put 2 conditions. So one is to free the political prisoners. That's what you just said, because that's, for me, it's one of the really key conditions. And the second one is to have, sort of a really meaningful process. And then it comes to who's not sitting at the table. Turking also Kurdish. There were many who were not sitting there. So I don't think the focus should be on how do we get the Assad people away. I'm like, that's been, unfortunately, it's very frustrating, but we won't get them away. The question is, who else needs to be there, who is not sitting there now? And I think that's where we still might have some leverage on getting people to the table who are not there yet. But if they fly to Geneva as part of the delegation, as you said, legally, not much to be done. You can hope that we will get arrest warrants for them outside, and then maybe they travel, but so that's the difficult, it's very frustrating. And we've been frustrated, and you must be 10,000 million times more than we are.
And there was this question, I think you saw that, and there was this question about ad hoc tribunals. Is it possible to set up ad hoc tribunal for Syria?
Also, if you can elaborate a little bit about this, and also recently there was a proposal by Sweden about doing also special tribunals, but it was only exclusive to ISIS crimes, which also has maybe some implications.
Yeah, I mean, the first ad hoc tribunals we had, and we know from Rwanda and former Yugoslavia, they were set up as a Security Council under Chapter 7. So this type, you would need the Security Council, and for that you would now have the ICC, but that way it's blocked. You have other forms, hybrid tribunals, which are often agreements between the state and the UN, so you would have Syria in. And then you have very few examples, like the case against the former dictator of Chad, Hissène Habré, in Senegal. That was a case under universal jurisdiction in Senegal, supported by the African Union, in a special chamber of the Senegalese courts. So that's also possible. There was no Security Council, and there was no support by Chad or treaty by Chad. So that's something extremely difficult, but legally under international law, it wouldn't prevent to have a group of whatever, 5, 10, 20 like-minded states to set up a tribunal under universal jurisdiction to try those cases. Legally, that's possible. It's a political question, like with the Security Council. But if Germany, France, and a number of other countries have a joint investigation team and then agree to set up a tribunal with a multilateral treaty, they could try those cases. But you need finances, you need political will, like to create another court and all of that. But there are options, and if you look into many conflicts in many countries, from former Yugoslavia to Cambodia to Sierra Leone to other regions, you will find many creative solutions and in the boundaries of international law. But what should not happen is something like Sweden proposes, I think, to have one court only for one party of the conflict, because that will certainly not contribute to any reconciliation or good future, where if you only sit on trial over one party of the conflict and you leave the others out. So that's a model, I think, which first, it's not really possible to realize, and second, it would be too one-sided to have any positive effects beyond prosecuting these
I'm
things.
sorry, I just feel the room is getting tired a bit, so I would like to speed it up and ask Ali for last room, and then I think I will close it here so you can still have dreams and maybe have a bit more of an interactive talk.
Hi, thank you. I'm sorry also I want to keep you here even more. My name is Ali, I'm also a student at Marcos Berlin. I have a comment / question. So, from my perspective, like from me and my friends, people who are currently working in the Syrian cause, let's call it like that, there was kind of implicit, it's a convention on the fact that the field of activism now is to go towards what is currently labeled as transitional justice, as the last resort, basically. And sort of the logic behind it was that that it's kind of the last straw for stopping what is called also the normalization of the Syrian regime. Although this term was not explicitly mentioned, but this is what I perceive to be the kind of the precondition towards such an activism, which is stopping normalization with the Syrian regime. But I also have an observation on that, which is, I mean, yeah, transitional justice also includes something like what we're discussing here today. However, the normalization with the Syrian regime, in my opinion, had already taken place to some extent, both institutionally and publicly. Institutionally on levels of not just the right wing, by claiming that Syria is a safe zone and not condemning the regime ever, but also from the left, from many...
far left, please.
Yeah, far left. I guess everyone knows. I mean, of course, the Linke and other, I guess, famous leftist figures who are not even, if not condemning, but succumbing to sort of a... But this is also not on a institutional level, that's what I meant, also on a, let's say, public level, by civil society, organizations, and and institutions that are openly adopting the so-called humanitarian level, that depoliticized, the humanitarian logic, the depoliticized humanitarian narrative of the Syrian, what happened in Syria. And so, in my opinion, if that is the case, then normalization already happened. And basically my question, which is a very, very stupidly naive question, is why is it the case that this normalization taking place? Why is I mean, we were always afraid that there will be a normalized relationship with the Syrian regime, but in my opinion, it's already taking place, because I mean, the Syrian embassy is still open here in Berlin. People are being forced to go attend the Syrian embassy. Germany, as a government, as a legal government, has never, and as far as I know, maybe I'm wrong, but has never actually condemned the Syrian regime directly. Has it? Maybe I'm mistaken. I'm sorry.
Times, yes.
Okay, maybe I'm mistaken.
Okay, but maybe just to cut it short a bit. So your question is basically that beyond legal measures, you observe a political process or organization that is also extended to the audience. Okay.
Yeah, on an institutional level and on a... I guess my question will be towards Ms. Brantner on maybe what is your perspective on the institutional level, if not the NGO and other...
I mean, the German government has certainly publicly, openly criticized Assad government many, many times. You can say maybe they have not done enough, but it's not as if they've not outspokenly and clearly called it what it is, crimes against humanity, etc. So for that, I'm not part of the government, but and I do criticize them a lot, but it's not as if they've never criticized Assad's regime. And they do, their public prosecutors do the prosecution based on crimes against humanity, torture, etc. But the question is, why is there a normalization? Because Assad, together with the Russian and Iranian support, has been winning militarily. Let's face it, that's the point. And he's been winning back one region after the other, and the last sort of foreign forces on the ground was in that zone were the Americans. They're leaving, so and no other troop is ready to go in and fight the Russians, the Iranians, and Assad. Does it need to lead to a normalization in the sense that we go back to thinking that he's a good guy? Certainly not. But why does it change the mentality over the last couple of years? Is because you have those military gains on the ground. And because everybody expects that in one day, earlier or later, Assad will have won back the territory of Syria. That doesn't mean that he will be able to govern all of Syria. I think there will be protracted terrorist struggles or whatever will come. And like, as you all say, you will not give up. But militarily, having reconquered the territory, it's a question of time. That's what people think. And then the question becomes, what do you do then? It's terrible, but you ask why, and it's the military reason. And yes, the question, this last week, we had a debate on Syria, which was very frustrating for me, because you had one guy from the CDU saying we have to lift sanctions, or part of the sanctions on Syria, And then, you know, you have applause by the AfD and the Linke. And I was like, this is so wrong. This is so wrong. But that's the reality. You have these different worlds connecting and asking for lifting the sanctions on Assad, which for me is crazy.
But I think that Ali meant something else.
Okay.
I think that he meant that the humanitarian discourse that we have been following now for so long, that it is actually supporting the normalization, that by just looking at the humanitarian cases, that we are forgetting about the political hard.
But I'm really not a defender of the German government too, and we have been harshly criticizing all the time the foreign ministry. I did so several times tonight. Still, I would say, to be very honest, for example, the security report that assesses the situation in Syria, whether it's safe or not, that was issued by the foreign ministry as a basis of decision for the Ministry of Interior here to see whether they should extend or not the stop of deportation. I mean, we wrote the shadow report. When we read the original report of the foreign ministry, we said, okay, our shadow report is even like less sharp than the report of the foreign ministry, saying that there is a very clear assessment, also political assessment, because it's a political decision also to say, no, like Syria is not safe, detentions are ongoing all over the territory, it's not just for oppositional people, the amnesties are, the reconciliation deals, and so on and so forth. I think we are facing a much bigger question than Syria, and I think this is something that maybe just also from an activist perspective, I feel sometimes there's it's not very helpful, I think, to feel that we are being ignored and not looked at, and to complain, because yes, to be very honest, I mean, in Iraq right now 500 people have been killed in less than a month, right? I think nobody here in the room knows this number. 12,000 people have been injured. It's just like there's a lot of things going on, and like priorities are all over. I think one thing that I hear quite often from teens who live here is they feel that they have to explain again and again what has happened and why Syria is not safe, and that everybody should know. And then I always say yes, but I look at Germany today, we have killed I don't know how many millions of Jews and people all over the world in World War II, and still we have today a party where parts of them are openly can be called fascists, and they are back in the vogue. So this is something that you need to continue to force your case. And I think by that, and I think this is important, and this is why sometimes also, although these settings are good, but what we need to get to is we need to get organized. You need to sit and to get organized and to go to these politicians. I mean, we did it 2 weeks ago. We went to the CDU, to 2 CDU guys. Basically, we took along Moadamani, human rights lawyer, and we sat with them and we told them, why did you say that we should discuss whether people could be sent back? And it's very hard because these guys don't give a shit. They want to, they want to be at the tabloids, they want to make politics, they don't really care. And they told us, yeah, Assad is a criminal, but so what? And so I think from that level, for example, setting up these victims associations, that you have a considerable number. For example, Families for Freedom is very nice, but you know what is the main challenge? They have 10, 15 members in Germany. It doesn't ring a bell. If you have 1,000 marching through Berlin, it makes a difference, And I think this is, we have the chance that there are 800,000 Syrians in Germany, and I think it's a chance to try to use this capital, basically, of getting organized. I know it's very hard, and it's not your role just as Syrian civil society, it's our role as Germans to support you and to set up the basis and the guidelines and the structures, so you don't have to do this all yourself, but I really think we have to do this.
Can you just say one last comment, or do you want to close the platform?
I think I would love to leave the last comment to Ameenah, because otherwise we'll get into a ping-pong, that I would say closing word and
Yeah, speaking about normalization, I think in Europe it's just far-right governments that are interested to normalize with the Syrian regime. The Italy prime minister, last year, he did this kind of statement about opening the embassy in Damascus. The Syria campaign did this campaign about chasing him, and until he actually came out and apologized about that. And now Hungary, they want to open the embassy, but it seems this one seems serious. But with everything is happening in Syria currently, I don't think even the Syrian activism community or the Syrian or NGOs have time to chase everything happening, like actually shit happening all over around of us. And in terms of the humanitarian discourse, I wanted to say that it's just a huge disappointment that I feel the main encouraging factor when it comes to disconnecting politics from the humanitarian cause is the UN agencies around the world. They've been pushing, when it comes to the UNHCR, they want to drop the politics paper, like the politics card when it comes to refugees. Refugees came here for a certain reason, but they don't want to mention the reason, the whole narrative that they've been advocating for, and the whole stories that they've been used from, and also international NGOs such as Oxfam, etc. And there is a long list that they find the stories of humanitarian crisis dropping out the politics paper more interesting to, or more easily broadcast or displayed.
That's a very general.
Can I just, because it's very difficult. For example, if we say we don't want to have any reconstruction aid and make that a condition, and say, you need to free the political prisoners first, etc., that would mean if we don't do humanitarian aid, we don't help anybody in Syria right now.
No, but...
And that's the tricky part, because the only thing that we can do is humanitarian aid. We used to do more stuff in some of the regions which were not under Assad control anymore. But as soon as they go back to Assad control, you don't want to do anything else there, because you immediately cooperate with the Assad regime and those forces. So the only thing we can still do, and it's still helping a lot of women's clinics and projects locally, is humanitarian aid. If we stop it, it will hit your friends first. So yes, I'm like, that's the logic we're in. It's quite binary. I'm like, I wish there would be more gray, but we've been fighting to keep the money still flowing into some of these regions, even though it's very difficult. So, in that sense, it's tricky, yeah? Because if we stop, then
but I feel like we are opening a big box now.
But I think that
think
she totally misunderstood my point. It was more about the narrative. I mean, I'm talking about the media campaigns that are being run by UN agencies. I'm speaking about kind of events being organized outside Syria. It has nothing with the
But which
aid.
narrative?
The narrative of refugees, the poor refugees leaving Syria without speaking about what has been left behind, trying to escape politics, trying to calling what is going on in Syria as politics.
But maybe I would like to cut the discussion here, because now we are entering a very big discussion. Maybe this can be a subject for another debate. On that level, one of the things, UN has to be impartial. So, I'm not a big UN fan. I think something that could have been done and that we should have been doing more is whenever UN didn't get access to besieged areas, and most people don't know that up to 98% of the requests of UN to enter areas of need that were besieged were refused, rejected by the Syrian regime. Yeah. And these numbers, and here we go again, this is why I'm saying there's no other way, and this, the UN cannot go and do advocacy. They could, they should, but they don't. This is international, this is a much bigger problem than just Syria. But this is why it's our role, whether we like it or not, to point the finger, to create transparency, and this is what Syria campaign did, for example, on that question, to also question whether UN, yes, should reside in the Four Seasons hotel that is owned by the cousin of Assad. And these things, we have to make it public, but this cannot be expected from the humanitarian level. But I think what can be expected maybe from the German society and civil society, and this is what I would like to close with, is something that is also again true to the German Revolution. I read this long feature with one of the historians who issued a book. His name is Sasha Kowalczuk, and he made a book recently. The title is a bit frustrating. It's called Die Übernahme, the Takeover. But he says one important point, and I think this is a point that we all have to work on, especially as Germans also. He talks about Anerkennung, recognition. He talks about the idea to recognize basically the experience and the knowledge and everything that the person has basically lived through, because this is only by this point that the person can also live something that is called self-recognition. Because your recognition is being built by the others respecting you, recognizing what you've been doing. And I think by basically moving up, and this is also something that we can all support, by choosing our words carefully, not to deal with people as refugees, but to be students who are from Syria, activists, human rights defenders, social workers, whatever, to ask them actively about their experience, and then to say, okay, this is something that I recognize and acknowledge, and I'm going to ask you from your experience, what have you been doing, is something that we can try to highlight much more than victimizing them. And maybe this is a good starting point we can all try to focus on in our work, and I think all of you are doing that also at a great level. So thank you very much also to the audience for bearing so long with us, and I wish you a lot of good conversations now, and hopefully soon justice for Syria and for all other countries and people in the world.